The most expensive thing I ever lost wasn't a company, a penthouse, or $1 billion. It was a kiss. Every Sunday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, I parked my black Mercedes in the same spot and walked the same narrow path lined with maple trees. The city roared less than a mile away, but here, the noise faded into something softer. Wind moved through the leaves. Birds called from branches overhead. Somewhere nearby, children laughed. I carried fresh white roses in one hand and a regret I couldn't put down in the other. People knew my name. Ethan Blackwood. Founder. Investor. Billionaire. Magazines printed my face. Business channels analyzed my decisions. Strangers assumed I lived a perfect life because I owned more square footage than most people could imagine and flew on planes that never waited in lines. They were wrong. The truth was simpler. I had spent years building an empire and almost no time building a life. By 35, I could buy nearly anything I wanted. Yet every night, I came home to silence. The penthouse overlooking Manhattan had 12 rooms. Most days, I walked through all of them without speaking a single word. Success has a strange sound when no one is there to celebrate it with you. It sounds like your own footsteps echoing off marble floors. It sounds like a phone vibrating with business calls at midnight. It sounds like another expensive bottle of wine opened and never finished. I followed the path until I reached a small brick building with large windows facing the street. Sunlight spilled across colorful paintings hanging inside. Children's artwork covered the walls. Bright blues, bold yellows, messy hearts, crooked stars, the kind of beauty that never appears in boardrooms. I stopped outside and stared through the glass. My reflection looked older than 35, not because of gray hair. There wasn't much of that yet. It was my eyes. Regret leaves marks that no amount of money can erase. I placed the roses beside the front door and sat on a wooden bench. The same bench. The same ritual. 52 Sundays a year. For 3 years. Some people visit churches. Some visit family. I came here because this place reminded me of the woman who changed everything. Lily Carter. Even thinking her name felt dangerous. Like touching an old scar to see if it still hurt. It always did. Especially when I remembered how it began. Not with a grand declaration. Not with fireworks. Not with love at first sight. It started with a single moment so small that neither of us understood what it would become. One kiss. 5 seconds. Maybe less. Long enough to change the direction of my life forever. Long enough to make a man who trusted numbers start believing in something he couldn't calculate. I closed my eyes and listened to the distant laughter inside the building. The sound brought me back to that night. Back to the crowded ballroom. Back to the woman who didn't care about my money. Back to the moment everything changed. At the time, I thought it was only a kiss. I had no idea it was the beginning of losing the person I used to be. 3 years earlier, if someone had asked me whether I was happy, I would have answered yes without hesitation. Not because it was true, but because I had spent so long confusing success with happiness that I no longer knew the difference. My alarm rang every morning at 5:30. By 6, I was already answering emails. By 7, I was inside a black SUV heading toward a glass tower that carried my name across its entrance in polished steel letters. Blackwood Technologies. 28 floors of offices. Thousands of employees. A valuation that financial analysts discussed like it was a living thing. Every quarter brought another record. Every year brought another award. Every achievement felt smaller than the one before it. That should have been my first warning. I remember standing in my corner office one winter morning, looking down at Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling windows. Snow drifted between skyscrapers. Yellow taxis crawled through traffic below. The city looked beautiful from 60 stories up. Distant. Manageable. Almost unreal. My assistant entered carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee exactly the way I liked it. 2 meetings had been moved. 3 investors wanted private calls. A reporter requested an interview. A charity board invited me to attend their annual gala. I approved everything without really listening. My days had become an endless cycle of decisions. Numbers. Contracts. Acquisitions. Growth. The company demanded more every year, and I gave it everything. There was always another goal. Another mountain to climb. Another reason to postpone living. Friends became contacts. Conversations became transactions. Even celebrations felt scheduled. When my birthday arrived that year, the company sent a custom cake to the office. Hundreds of employees signed a card. The penthouse waiting for me that night was worth more than the houses on most city blocks. Yet when I stepped through the front door after midnight, the silence felt louder than the applause I had received all day. I loosened my tie, poured a drink, and stood alone in the kitchen staring at the skyline. The reflection in the window looked like a stranger wearing my face. 35 years old, wealthy beyond anything I had imagined as a kid, completely exhausted. The strange thing about loneliness is that it does not announce itself all at once. It arrives quietly. One missed dinner, one canceled vacation, one weekend spent working instead of calling someone back. Then suddenly years have disappeared. Looking back, I think part of me knew something was missing. I just did not know what it was. That changed on a Thursday afternoon when my assistant reminded me about the charity gala. I almost declined. I rarely attended those events unless there was a business reason. Smile for cameras, shake hands, write a check, leave early. That was usually the entire evening. But for reasons I still cannot explain, I said yes. One small decision, one event added to my calendar. At the time, it seemed completely insignificant. I had no way of knowing that a few days later I would walk into a crowded ballroom and meet the woman who would change everything I thought I understood about success, about happiness, and about myself. The gala occupied the top floor of the Riverside Grand Hotel, a place where every surface seemed designed to remind guests how much money existed in the world. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the ballroom entrance. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with sparkling water and champagne. The room smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. I arrived 20 minutes late, which for me counted as early. A dozen people greeted me before I made it 10 feet past the entrance. Investors, politicians, charity board members. Everyone smiled. Everyone wanted something. By the time I reached the center of the ballroom, I already regretted coming. I listened to conversations about market forecasts, real estate developments, and fundraising targets. The topics changed. The people changed. The words never did. Then I noticed her. Not because she was trying to be noticed. Quite the opposite. She stood near a display showcasing artwork created by children from local community programs. While everyone else focused on donors and photographers, she was focused on a little girl explaining a painting of a yellow butterfly. The child could not have been older than 8. The woman crouched beside her, listening as if the painting were the most important thing in the room. She nodded seriously at every detail. The little girl smiled wider with each sentence. Something about the scene felt strangely out of place among all the luxury. Real, honest, human. I found myself watching longer than I intended. She wore a simple navy blue dress. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to attract attention. Her blonde hair rested loosely on her shoulders. When she laughed at something the little girl said, it reached her eyes first. I could not remember the last time I had seen a smile that looked so genuine. A board member stepped beside me and followed my gaze. "That is Lily Carter," he said. "She runs one of the arts education programs we support. Good teacher. The kids adore her." I nodded politely, but something unexpected happened. For the first time that evening, I actually cared about the answer. Before I could ask another question, Lily stood and thanked the child before moving toward another group of students. She never once looked in my direction. That should not have mattered. Yet somehow it did. Most people recognized me within seconds. They knew my name before introductions. They knew my net worth before shaking my hand. Lily seemed completely unaware that I existed. An hour later, I found myself near the artwork display again. Not intentionally, I told myself. The lie sounded weak even inside my own head. Across the room, Lily was helping a nervous teenage boy present one of his paintings to potential donors. She encouraged him quietly, stepping back so he could receive the attention himself. Watching her, I realized something unsettling. Everyone else in the ballroom was trying to impress the people with money. Lily was trying to help the people without it. And for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly wanted to know everything about her. The auction portion of the evening began just after 8. Round tables filled the ballroom, while a spotlight illuminated the stage at the front of the room. The energy shifted immediately. Conversations grew louder. Paddles appeared. Donors prepared to compete for vacation packages, artwork, and exclusive experiences. I took my seat near the front beside people whose names regularly appeared on financial news channels. Normally, I would have spent the next hour checking messages beneath the table and waiting for the event to end. Instead, my attention kept drifting across the room. Lily stood near a group of students from her program. She looked completely comfortable among them and completely uninterested in impressing anyone else. The contrast was impossible to ignore. A few minutes later, the host stepped onto the stage and announced a surprise fundraising challenge. The goal was simple. If donations reached a certain amount before the end of the night, a local arts center that had been struggling financially would receive enough support to remain open for another year. Applause swept through the ballroom. Donations began climbing immediately. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. The numbers flashed across a large screen behind the stage. The room buzzed with excitement. Then the host smiled and introduced a series of light-hearted audience challenges designed to encourage even more giving. Most were harmless. Sing a song. Tell an embarrassing story. Participate in a trivia contest. The crowd loved it. People laughed. Cameras flashed. For the first time all evening, the atmosphere felt less formal, more human. Then the host glanced toward Lily. A playful grin spread across his face. "Lily Carter," he called out, "you have spent years helping this community. We need your help one more time tonight." The audience cheered. Lily looked startled. She shook her head immediately, already laughing. The host ignored her protest. "If we reach the final fundraising goal, would you agree to participate in our mystery challenge?" More cheers followed. Lily covered her face for a second before finally nodding. The crowd erupted. Minutes later, the donation total crossed the final threshold. The room exploded with applause. Children from the program jumped to their feet celebrating. Lily looked genuinely emotional. Then the host revealed the challenge. He invited one volunteer donor and Lily onto the stage for a symbolic moment recognizing the partnership between community supporters and educators. Before I fully understood what was happening, several people at my table were pointing directly at me. My name spread through the room. The host seized the opportunity immediately. "Ethan Blackwood," he announced. "I think we have our volunteer." Laughter followed. I should have declined. Instead, I found myself walking toward the stage. Lily climbed the steps from the opposite side. When we reached the center, she finally looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Her blue eyes widened slightly. Not with admiration, not with recognition, just surprise. The host explained the challenge. A simple celebratory photo. A cheek kiss for charity. Harmless. Friendly. Entirely innocent. The audience counted down together. 3, 2, 1. Lily turned toward me, smiling nervously. For a brief second, everything else disappeared. The lights. The crowd. The cameras. There was only her. And somehow, in that single moment, the life I thought I wanted no longer felt quite enough. The applause faded. Cameras flashed one last time. Then the moment was over. At least, it should have been. The audience returned to conversations. The host moved on to the next part of the program. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. The evening continued exactly as it was supposed to. But something inside me refused to move forward with it. I returned to my table and stared at the stage without seeing any of it. Across the ballroom, Lily was surrounded by students and volunteers celebrating the success of the fundraiser. She looked relieved that the spotlight had moved elsewhere. I should have forgotten about her within minutes. That was how my life worked. Meetings ended. Deals closed. People came and went. Everything moved forward. Efficient. Predictable. Controlled. Instead, I found myself replaying those few seconds over and over. Not because of the gesture itself. It had been innocent. Brief. Meaningless to everyone else in the room. What unsettled me was the feeling that followed. For years, every interaction in my life had carried some hidden agenda. Someone wanted access, influence, investment, approval. But when Lily looked at me, there had been none of that. No calculation, no expectation. She had simply been herself. The realization stayed with me all night. By midnight, I was back in my penthouse overlooking the city. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The skyline glowed beneath low clouds. Normally, I would have opened my laptop and worked until exhaustion took over. Instead, I stood at the glass holding a cup of coffee that slowly grew cold in my hand. My thoughts kept returning to a woman I barely knew. That irritated me more than I wanted to admit. The next morning was worse. During a board meeting, someone asked for my opinion on an acquisition proposal. I realized they had repeated the question 3 times before I answered. At lunch, I caught myself searching online for information about the arts program from the gala. By evening, I knew exactly how many students it served and how long Lily had worked there. None of this made sense. I had billion-dollar negotiations waiting for my attention. Yet somehow I was wondering whether she preferred coffee or tea, whether she always smiled that way, whether she had any idea she had occupied nearly every free thought in my head for 24 hours. Days passed. The feeling did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger. One afternoon, my assistant entered my office carrying a stack of documents. She paused halfway across the room. "Ethan," she said carefully, "are you feeling all right?" I looked up from the same page I had been pretending to read for 10 minutes. "Why?" "Because you have been staring out that window for almost half an hour." I glanced toward Manhattan stretching beyond the glass. She was right. I had not been thinking about the company. I had not been thinking about investors. I had been thinking about Lily. After my assistant left, I leaned back in my chair and laughed quietly at myself. It was ridiculous, completely irrational. Yet for the first time in years, something in my life felt unpredictable, alive. And deep down, a part of me already knew the truth. I did not want to forget her. I wanted to see her again. Lily Carter was surprisingly difficult to find. Not because her address was secret or because she was hiding from the world. She was difficult to find because she spent almost no time in the places people like me usually looked. There were no interviews, no personal website, no carefully managed public image, no endless stream of photographs documenting every detail of her life. The more I learned, the more unusual she seemed. 2 weeks after the gala, I found myself standing outside a modest community arts center in Brooklyn on a gray Saturday morning. The building occupied an old converted warehouse between a bakery and a hardware store. Children hurried through the front doors carrying paint supplies and sketchbooks. Parents followed behind them holding coffee cups and jackets. It was nothing like the world I lived in. And somehow, that made me want to walk inside even more. The smell of paint and fresh coffee greeted me the moment I entered. Bright artwork covered nearly every wall. Handmade sculptures sat on shelves. Laughter echoed through the hallways. Nobody paid attention to me. Nobody cared who I was. The realization felt strangely refreshing. Then I saw her. Lily stood near a long table helping a group of children work on a mural. Blue paint decorated one sleeve of her sweater. A streak of yellow marked one hand. She looked completely absorbed in what she was doing. Happy. Present. For a moment, I simply watched. Not because I was nervous. At least that is what I told myself. The truth was harder to admit. Billion-dollar negotiations never intimidated me. Walking across a room to speak with Lily Carter suddenly did. Eventually she looked up. Her eyes met mine. Recognition appeared almost immediately. Then surprise. Then confusion. "Ethan Blackwood," she said. I laughed softly. At least someone finally knows my name. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "What are you doing here?" That was an excellent question. I had rehearsed several answers during the drive from Manhattan. None of them sounded convincing anymore. "I wanted to see how the donation money was helping," I said. "Technically true." She folded her arms and studied me for a second. "You came all the way to Brooklyn on a Saturday morning to inspect paint supplies." When she said it that way, the excuse sounded ridiculous. I deserved that, I admitted. Her smile grew slightly. "Good." We stood there for a moment while children painted behind her. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. That alone surprised me. Most conversations in my life carried pressure, expectations, agendas. This one did not. Finally, I asked the question I had been carrying for 2 weeks. "Would you like to have dinner with me sometime?" Lily blinked. The children nearby continued painting as if nothing important had happened. Maybe nothing important had, because after a few seconds, she shook her head gently. "No." The answer landed harder than I expected. Not because she sounded rude. She did not. Her voice remained kind, honest, which somehow made it worse. "Why not?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Because, Ethan," she said softly, "people like you usually want a story, not a person." Then she turned back toward the children, leaving me standing there with no response and the uncomfortable feeling that she might already understand me better than I understood myself. For the next week, I told myself to let it go. Lily had said no. End of story. Rational adults accepted rejection and moved on. That was the mature thing to do. Unfortunately, every time I convinced myself I was ready to move on, something reminded me of her. A painting hanging in a hotel lobby. a child carrying an art project through Grand Central Station, a news article about community education funding. Suddenly, the entire city seemed determined to mention Lily Carter without actually saying her name. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, an envelope arrived at my office. It contained a handwritten thank you card from the Arts Center. Most donors received identical printed acknowledgments. This one included personal notes from several students. Crayon drawings filled the margins. One child had drawn a stick figure wearing a suit beside a very large building. Another had written, "Thank you for helping us keep making art." The simplicity of it stopped me. I could not remember the last time gratitude in my world had been that honest. Before I realized what I was doing, I was driving back to Brooklyn the following Saturday. This time I did not go inside immediately. I stood across the street holding a cup of coffee and watching the building wake up for the day. Parents arrived carrying folding chairs. Volunteers unloaded supplies. Children rushed through the doors with the kind of energy adults lose somewhere along the way. Through the front window, I spotted Lily arranging paintings for a student exhibition. She looked focused, determined, completely unaware that one of the wealthiest men in New York was standing outside debating whether he had the courage to walk through a doorway. The thought made me laugh at myself. Eventually, I crossed the street. Lily noticed me the moment I entered. Her eyebrows lifted. "You again." Her tone carried amusement this time instead of surprise. I held up the coffee in my hand. "I brought a peace offering." She glanced at the cup. "Is that a bribe?" "It depends." "Is it working?" A reluctant smile appeared. "Maybe a little." For the next hour, I helped volunteers move tables and hang artwork. Nobody treated me differently. Nobody cared about stock prices or quarterly earnings reports. One little boy handed me a box of markers and ordered me to organize them by color. I obeyed. Lily witnessed the entire thing and laughed so hard she nearly dropped a stack of papers. Later, while students explored the exhibition, we sat on folding chairs near the back wall. The room buzzed with conversation and excitement. For the first time, we talked without barriers. Not about business. Not about money. About favorite books. Childhood memories. Places we wanted to visit someday. The conversation felt effortless. When the afternoon ended, I walked her to the front door. Rain had started falling again, tapping softly against the sidewalk. Lily looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You know, Ethan, most people would have stopped showing up by now." I slipped my hands into my coat pockets. "Most people probably would have." Her eyes softened. "Then it is a good thing you are not most people." The strangest part was not that Lily and I kept spending time together. The strangest part was how quickly she began changing things I had believed were permanent. One Sunday afternoon, we sat on a weathered bench outside the Arts Center while children chased one another across a small park nearby. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass. A street musician played guitar somewhere down the block. It was the kind of ordinary day I would have ignored before meeting her. Now it felt more valuable than most events on my calendar. Lily held a paper cup of coffee between both hands and studied me with the same thoughtful expression she always wore when she sensed I was hiding something. "You never talk about your family," she said. The question caught me off guard. Most people never asked. They assumed success explained everything worth knowing. "There is not much to tell," I answered. She waited. Not pushing, just waiting. Somehow that made honesty easier. My father worked 80 hours a week building a company. Then I spent 20 years doing the exact same thing. Lily glanced toward the children playing nearby. "And your mother?" I looked away. "She passed away when I was in college." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us. Cars passed. Dogs barked. Somewhere a train rumbled in the distance. After a while, Lily asked a question nobody had ever asked before. "Were you happy?" I opened my mouth to answer immediately, then stopped. Because for the first time, I was not sure. I thought I was, I admitted. "That is not the same thing," she said quietly. The words settled somewhere deep inside me. Later that afternoon, she showed me the storage room where donated supplies were kept. Paintbrushes, canvases, boxes of markers. The room was small and cluttered. Nothing about it should have felt important. Yet Lily spoke about every item as if it represented possibility. This paint set helped a teenager discover she wanted to become an illustrator. That sketchbook gave a shy little boy confidence to share his work. She saw stories where everyone else saw objects. Potential where everyone else saw limitations. Standing there, I realized something about her that had escaped me until then. Lily never measured people by what they owned. She measured them by what they gave. A week later, she invited me to attend a student showcase. Families filled the auditorium. Children displayed paintings, sculptures, and drawings they had spent months creating. During the presentation, one nervous young girl froze on stage while introducing her artwork. Without hesitation, Lily walked over and stood beside her. She did not take control. She did not speak for her. She simply stayed there until the girl found the courage to continue on her own. The audience applauded. The child beamed with pride. Lily stepped quietly back into the crowd. Watching her, something shifted inside me. For years, I had admired people who built companies, accumulated wealth, and dominated industries. Lily taught me there was another kind of strength, the kind that helped others shine, the kind that changed lives without demanding recognition. And somewhere between the park bench, the storage room, and that small stage, I stopped seeing Lily as the woman I wanted to impress. I started seeing her as the person I wanted to become worthy of. The first sign of trouble arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway through a meeting with senior executives when every phone in the room began vibrating at nearly the same time. At first, nobody paid much attention. Then expressions started changing. Screens were checked. Brows tightened. The atmosphere shifted. My chief legal officer slid a tablet across the table toward me. An investigative article filled the screen. The headline mentioned Blackwood Technologies by name. A former partner company was being accused of unethical financial reporting practices. We had never been involved in those decisions directly, but the article connected our companies closely enough to create public suspicion. By lunchtime, every major business outlet was repeating the story. Television analysts debated it. Social media exploded with opinions. Reporters gathered outside corporate offices. The facts became less important than the narrative, and the narrative was spreading faster than the truth ever could. For the next several days, my life became a storm of interviews, legal consultations, shareholder calls, and emergency meetings. I slept 4 hours a night, sometimes less. Every conversation centered on damage control. Every decision carried consequences measured in millions of dollars. In the middle of all that chaos, Lily kept calling. At first, I answered. She reminded me to eat, to rest, to remember that my value as a person was not tied to stock prices or public opinion. Hearing her voice felt like stepping into sunlight after hours underground. Then the pressure intensified. Advisors warned me to avoid any public appearances unrelated to the company. Public relations consultants carefully managed every interaction. One evening, Lily invited me to attend a student art showcase we had discussed weeks earlier. I promised I would be there. I genuinely intended to go, but an emergency board meeting ran late. Then another crisis appeared. Then another. By the time I looked at the clock, the event had already ended. My phone contained 3 missed calls from Lily. I told myself I would explain tomorrow. Tomorrow became 2 days later. When I finally arrived at the arts center, the disappointment in her eyes hit harder than any negative headline. "You did not come," she said quietly. "I know. I am sorry. Something important happened." She nodded once. "Important always happens, Ethan." The words stung because they were true. I tried to explain. The company, the investigation, the pressure, the expectations. Lily listened patiently. Then she asked a simple question. "If everything disappeared tomorrow, who would you be?" I stared at her. For years, nobody had ever asked me that. Because everyone assumed the company was who I was. Maybe I assumed it too. When I could not answer immediately, sadness crossed her face. Not anger. Not frustration. Sadness. Somehow that felt worse. We stood in silence while children laughed somewhere down the hallway. Finally, Lily looked away. "I think you are still trying to decide whether your life belongs to you or to your success." Before I could respond, she picked up a stack of papers and walked toward another room. I remained standing there long after she disappeared from view, carrying the uncomfortable realization that the greatest threat to us had never been a business scandal. It was the possibility that she was right. The conversation haunted me for days. No matter how many meetings filled my schedule or how many reports crossed my desk, I kept hearing Lily's question. If everything disappeared tomorrow, who would you be? I wanted to dismiss it as philosophical nonsense. I wanted to bury it beneath spreadsheets and earnings projections. Instead, it followed me everywhere. One evening, after another 14-hour day, I found myself standing alone in my office long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights stretched across Manhattan like a field of stars. Thousands of windows glowed against the darkness. Somewhere beyond them was Brooklyn. Somewhere beyond them was Lily. My phone sat on the desk beside me. 3 unread messages from her waited on the screen. None of them asked for anything. One shared a photograph of a student's painting. Another mentioned a community event scheduled for the weekend. The third simply said she hoped I was taking care of myself. I read that last message 5 times. Then another call came through. A major investor wanted reassurance. A public statement needed approval. A legal team required immediate input. By the time I finished, midnight had arrived. I never replied. The next morning became the next week. The crisis surrounding the company slowly improved, but the distance between Lily and me grew with alarming speed. Calls became less frequent. Messages became shorter. Then they stopped altogether. I noticed immediately. Pride convinced me not to mention it. That decision remains one of the worst mistakes of my life. 2 weeks later, I finally drove to the arts center. Rain fell steadily from a gray sky. Water collected along the curb. The neighborhood looked quieter than usual. When I stepped inside, the familiar smell of paint and coffee greeted me. Children worked on projects in the main room. Volunteers moved supplies between classrooms. Everything looked the same, except Lily was not there. I found one of the staff members arranging artwork near the front desk. She smiled politely when she saw me. "Ethan, it has been a while. Where's Lily?" The question escaped faster than I intended. The smile faded slightly. "She took a teaching position upstate." My stomach dropped. "What?" "She left 3 days ago. She said it was a good opportunity. New program. More students." I stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. "She left?" The woman nodded gently. "She said goodbye to everyone." "I thought you knew." I did not. The realization landed with crushing clarity. Lily had not disappeared. She had simply stopped waiting. Slowly, I walked through the building one final time. The mural she helped students paint still covered one wall. The folding chair where we had shared coffee remained near the window. Her presence lingered everywhere except the one place it mattered. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. I stood beneath the awning watching water race down the sidewalk. For months, I had convinced myself there would always be another conversation, another weekend, another chance to say what mattered. Suddenly, there was not. And for the first time since I built my company, success felt completely useless. Because no amount of money could buy back a moment that had already passed. The penthouse felt larger after Lily left. Not physically. The square footage had not changed. The floor-to-ceiling windows still overlooked the same skyline. The marble floors still reflected city lights after dark. Yet every room seemed emptier than before. I discovered something strange about loneliness during those months. It becomes easier to notice once someone has shown you what connection feels like. Before Lily, I had mistaken isolation for independence. Now the silence followed me everywhere. I woke before sunrise and reached for my phone out of habit. No messages waited. I finished meetings and found myself wanting to tell her about them. No one cared. I passed bookstores and remembered conversations about novels she loved. I walked by coffee shops and remembered rainy afternoons in Brooklyn. The city had not changed. I had. One evening, nearly 6 weeks after she left, I stood alone in the arts center after closing hours. The staff had given me a key so I could review plans for future funding projects. The building was quiet. Paintings lined the walls. Children's sculptures occupied display shelves. The familiar scent of paint and paper lingered in the air. I wandered through the classrooms until I reached the small storage room Lily once showed me. Everything looked exactly as it had before. Boxes, supplies, half-finished projects waiting for students to return. Then I noticed a framed photograph resting on a shelf. It had probably been there for months. Somehow I had never seen it. Lily stood in the center surrounded by children holding paint-covered hands in the air. Every face in the photograph carried the same expression. Joy, not because of what they owned, because of who they shared the moment with. I stared at that picture longer than I cared to admit. Eventually, I sat down on an old folding chair and asked myself a question I had avoided for years. What was all of this for? The company, the wealth, the endless pursuit of more. I had spent decades building an empire. Yet the happiest memories of the previous year had not happened inside boardrooms. They had happened on park benches, in classrooms, during conversations that cost nothing. For the first time in my life, success felt incomplete. The realization frightened me because it demanded change. Real change. Not temporary adjustments. Not symbolic gestures. The next morning, I canceled 3 meetings. My executive team assumed something was wrong. In a way, they were correct. Something was wrong. I had been living according to a definition of success that no longer fit. Over the following months, I began redirecting resources toward community programs, educational initiatives, and projects that created opportunities instead of headlines. Not because it improved public perception, not because it generated profits, because somewhere along the way, Lily had taught me that the most meaningful investments were measured in lives, not dollars. The strange part was that the more I changed, the more clearly I understood what I had lost. Every improvement carried her fingerprints. Every better decision reminded me of the person who inspired it. And every Sunday morning, I found myself returning to the same place, carrying fresh white roses and a hope I refused to abandon completely. 3 years can change a person in ways that are difficult to explain. The version of me that first walked into that charity gala would not have recognized the man I became afterward. At first, the changes were small. I started leaving the office before midnight. Then I began visiting the programs we supported instead of simply signing approval forms. I learned the names of students, their stories, their dreams. Somewhere along the way, numbers stopped being the most interesting thing in every room. People became more important. One spring morning, nearly 2 years after Lily left New York, I stood inside a newly renovated community arts center in Philadelphia. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows. Fresh paint brightened the walls. Easels filled the classrooms. Children would arrive in a few hours for the grand opening. Reporters waited outside. Donors prepared speeches. My executive team expected me to stand in front of cameras and explain why Blackwood Foundation had invested millions of dollars into educational programs across multiple states. Instead, I found myself staring at a mural painted by local students. It reminded me of something Lily once said. Every child deserves a place where they feel seen. I had carried those words longer than she probably realized. During the ceremony, people thanked me repeatedly. They praised the funding, the expansion, the vision. Every compliment felt misplaced. The truth was simple. None of this would have happened without her. Lily had never asked me to build anything. She never demanded change. She simply lived according to values that exposed how empty some of mine had become. That was the remarkable thing about her. She transformed people without trying to. Later that evening, I returned to Manhattan and found a small package waiting outside my apartment door. No return address. No note. Just a plain brown box. Curious, I carried it inside and opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside rested a sketchbook. My heart stopped. I recognized it immediately. Months earlier, one of Lily's students had filled it with drawings. The child had planned to give it to her before she moved away. Somehow it had never reached her. Tucked between the pages was a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The handwriting belonged to an elderly volunteer from the arts center. Ethan, if you're reading this, I thought you should know something. Lily never stopped talking about you. She followed every new project, every school, every center. She said you became the man she always believed you could be. At the bottom was an address. Nothing else. Just an address in a small town nearly 300 miles away. I stared at it for a long time. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. Traffic moved below. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through the night. 3 years earlier, I would have scheduled a meeting and continued working. This time, I grabbed my car keys. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something that success had never taught me. Some opportunities are worth more than every achievement in the world. And if there was even the smallest chance that Lily Carter still wanted to see me, I was not going to waste another day finding out. The address led me to a small town nestled between rolling hills and quiet farmland. The drive took nearly 6 hours. Long enough for doubt to appear. Long enough for hope to become dangerous. By the time I arrived, the sun was beginning to set. Golden lights stretched across the streets. Storefront windows glowed warmly. Families walked along sidewalks carrying groceries and coffee cups. It felt like a different world from Manhattan. Slower. Softer. Real. I parked across from the address and stared through the windshield. The building looked familiar in a way I could not immediately explain. Large windows. Brick walls. Bright paintings visible inside. Then understanding hit me. It was another arts center. Not a corporate office. Not a university. An arts center. My heart pounded as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Children's laughter drifted through an open door. The sound carried me backward through years of memories. Brooklyn. Paint-covered tables. Folding chairs. Lily's smile. I walked inside. The room buzzed with activity. Students displayed artwork while parents admired paintings hanging on freshly painted walls. Near the entrance stood a plaque recognizing the center's founders. My eyes found a name immediately. Lily Carter. For a moment, I could not breathe. She had done it. She had built something entirely her own. Everything she ever believed in lived inside these walls. I moved deeper into the building. Every classroom felt familiar. Not because I had been there before, but because I recognized her influence everywhere. Encouragement written on white boards. Student artwork displayed proudly. Small details designed to make people feel welcome. Then I saw her. She stood near the far end of the room, speaking with a young student. 3 years disappeared instantly. Her hair was slightly longer. Her face looked a little older, wiser, but it was still Lily. Still the woman who changed the direction of my life without ever realizing how completely. The student ran off toward a group of friends. Lily turned. Her eyes met mine. Everything around us seemed to fade. The conversations, the music, the movement. Just like that night years ago. Neither of us spoke at first. We simply stared. Then a smile slowly appeared on her face. Ethan. Hearing my name in her voice again felt like coming home after being lost for years. I laughed softly because it was the only way to stop myself from saying 100 things at once. Hi, Lily. You found me. I looked around the center. You left a pretty obvious trail. She laughed. The sound was exactly the same. Warm. Familiar. Impossible to forget. We talked for hours after the event ended. About everything. The years apart. The mistakes. The lessons. The people we had become. At one point, Lily looked at me and shook her head with quiet amazement. You really changed. I smiled. You were the reason. She lowered her eyes briefly before looking back at me. No, Ethan. You chose it. That was the difference. The evening grew darker outside the windows. Eventually, we stepped onto the front porch. The town lights twinkled beneath a sky filled with stars. Neither of us rushed the moment. We had already wasted enough time. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it. 3 years earlier, a brief moment had started everything. This time, there was no audience, no cameras, no fundraiser, just 2 people standing beneath the night sky, choosing each other at last. And for the first time in my life, I understood that the greatest success was never something you build. It is someone you are lucky enough to build a life with.